All right. Joining me today is cartoonist Glenn Head. He has a new graphic memoir, Chartwell Manor, coming out in May from Fantagraphics. And it is a book that details his 2 years at the boarding school in a series that was run by a serial sexual abuser. And since April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, I thought this would be a great time to have him on. And so before we get started, let me go ahead and bring him in. Hey,
Hi.
Glenn, how's it going?
Good, good. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Of course.
So before we get started, how did you get involved in maybe, say, comics or cartooning, and what have you done, because I know that you have a background in the with comics.
That's true. Well, actually, I guess one way I can start this off is by relating it to the book Chartwell Manor, because when I first got sent away to the school, that was the beginning of me drawing, getting into cartooning, and really finding that to be an identity for myself, so to speak. And it was while at that school that I was also indoctrinated into underground comics in a way. And I present this in the book actually as a kind of demonic force, because that's how comics, underground comics, appeared to me. And that was when I was first really grabbed by them, by, Zap Comics, Robert Crumb, all that. And it was in this kind of demonic world that was this boarding school. And so that's when I first really drew comic books. That's when I first really got into that entire world. And I still associate the world of underground comics with something dangerous, risky, forbidden, because those comics, you weren't supposed to be reading them if you were under the age of 18, and I was like 14 when I first saw them. So there was that sense of the forbidden, something that a kid isn't supposed to see, in the same way that the boarding school I was at, which was run by a serial pedophile, was not a place that kids were supposed to be. So that was really the beginning of me getting into comics, and been doing it ever since. I don't know how much fast forwarded you want that from that point, but that was really the beginning.
Whatever you'd like, to tell us about it.
Okay. Well, I mean, from there, I continued with it, and I guess what I'd say is that in terms of real education in comics, where I really got that was at the School of Visual Arts in New York in the early 80s. And that's very important because that was a time of autobiography really coming into the fore in comics, where it became really accepted in underground comics and sort of that world of the avant-garde in comics, like we'll say Art Spiegelman's Mouse, to really delve into personal tales, maybe possibly historical stuff in the case of Mouse, the Holocaust. But even before that, there had been a Justin Green book that was all about, say, Catholic school and how or Catholicism and how that had affected him. But yeah, when I was at that school at SVA, there was a great deal of autobiographical work that we had pushed on us, and that was when I really delved into it, really looked at developing myself as a character, and portraying myself in difficult situations where I was living on the Lower East Side and drinking and bad behavior. And I can relate all of this also again to this book I just did, Chartwell Manor, where a lot of this bad behavior started. So, but yeah, that was a good time to be learning the stuff, learning the craft of it. And it was a sort of a time of post-underground comics, you might call them, because at that time there were no real publishers either. So you were going to have to self-publish and get the books out on your own. Okay.
And then in the 90s, you co-created Snake Eyes.
Yeah, that's correct. And that actually grew out of my School of Visual Arts experience, because when I was at that art school, I met a lot of these artists who were in that book. And that book also grew out, in fact, from SVA project that Mark Newgarden was involved in. And that book was eventually squashed because of some kind of internal squabble. And out of the ashes of that rose Snake Eyes, because myself and cartoonist Kaz got involved in that. We edited it. And it was kind of another post-underground book that followed on the heels of Raw and Weirdo, and had some of the energy of both, but was, I think, its own thing, and kind of a consolidation of a lot of the best talents in the post-underground comics game at that time. And we did that together. We did 3 issues of that.
So let's go ahead and start. I mean, you've mentioned it a couple of times, Chartwell Manor. But can you give us like a, you've given us some of it. Can you give us like a, a quick summary of what it's about and what, it's obviously autobiographical, but and it's pretty straightforward as to what it covers. But what can you tell us a little bit about it, and maybe how you decided to turn this part of your life into a graphic novel?
Yeah, sure. I guess that's also in itself a long story too. As I said, the underground comics thing first showed itself to me when I was at that school. And when I was at that school, I was very struck by the Gothic haunted house kind of quality that it had of being in another world. It seemed like something from an earlier century. This whole thing of like British discipline and all that. So I think that from the time I was there, I looked at it as material. It struck me as material. It struck me that the headmaster, who was this larger-than-life, charismatic manipulator, almost like Falstaff, just a larger-than-life figure, as I say, would make for a good character. So I had wanted to really draw that for a long time, I think. And it took a lot of years before I was capable of actually getting a handle on the material. I had tried it as a 32-page comic, as an 8-page comic, and it was only in recent years, having done my first graphic novel memoir, a book entitled Chicago, where I was broke and homeless and crazy on the streets when I was 19. And I met some of my underground comics heroes in Chicago, Skip Williamson and Robert Crumb, that I began to understand what it might be like working on a bigger canvas, And I had some idea that I would probably be doing this book next after I finished that book. It really is a different animal working on the graphic novel from the comic. And as I was saying, I was involved in all these comics in the 80s and 90s. And so much of the way that can work is that it's kind of like, to coin a phrase, it's kind of like brevity is the soul of the comic. It was how we were raised with it, meaning you should be boiling it down. You shouldn't be expanding it, right? Mm-hmm. And the gears really shifted on that one when it came to the graphic novel. And that's what I found, especially in this book, Chartwell Manor, that there were scenes I would write, and then I would find, because I would feel like, well, I got everything into that one-page scene. I would realize later that that scene could actually be expanded on, and there's more to it, and it would actually help the book. It would help the characters. So that's one of the main things about the graphic novel, is that you can really expand things. You can make characters bigger. You can make them real. They're not one-dimensional. They're not flat like Dick Tracy, the strip that I love, but is very limiting in that regard. So it took a lot of time to process this material. I think that's the other thing to put in here. I mean, I was just talking about the formalist aspects of getting to where I could do this kind of book, which did take quite a while. But in terms of looking at all these things from my past and coming to grips with them enough to use them as material. The first thing that's really important in that is having enough time pass that you can really delve into it. It's not easy to draw yourself being abused physically. It's a tough thing to face. It's a tough thing to perform. It's a tough thing to do, to make yourself a character having that happen, to have enough distance to look at it like a movie, so to speak, and just have yourself be that character in that movie. So a lot of it is time. Time has to pass before you can use it because you might be too caught up emotionally with it. And as time passed and I felt less and less emotionally involved in it, I guess that also made it more possible for me to work with. Having said that, it's not easy to do, and there's a tendency, to continually process things throughout your life. You don't like finish processing something and then you're clear, so to speak. It's still there with you, but you may have enough distance, hopefully, that you can work with it as material and work with characters like Lynch or some of my friends at school and just, capture that world, because that's what's really important to me. When I'm drawing autobiography, it's very important to me that tonally things feel like what I experienced. So when you read this book, you know how I felt. You know how my parents felt. You get some understanding of, say, my mother's anxiety or my father's difficulty and kind of evasiveness about really looking at these things. So it's important to try to capture all of that, as opposed to simply the narrative itself. I'm not looking simply to depict what went on with myself and all these other kids at school. It's important to me that I do it because I don't think anybody else could do it who went to that school. But what I'm really trying to capture is the aftermath and the effects of these things and how they hit me and how they hit some of the other kids who, as you read in the book, my character comes across later and sees what has happened to them. Some of that is pretty disturbing.
So let's talk a little bit about the process. When you're drawing, how long does it, kind of take you to do a page? And do you have, are there any artists who kind of have influenced your work?
Well, yeah, there's plenty. I'm not sure where I should start here with that. The underground comics were an enormous influence on me because, as I say, I saw this stuff when I was like 14, and you weren't supposed to be seeing it until you were 18. So it seemed forbidden. It seemed exciting. It seemed to be touching on a lot of dangerous things, including sex and violence and things that have affected one really personally. And having only read Mad Magazine before underground comics, that was kind of eye-opening. So basically, all of the underground cartoonists whose work I saw really had an impact on mine. I mean, just looking at this page that you've put up here, one thing that you can kind of see is a certain roughness about the art. It's not what I would call crude exactly, because the graphics and the design are all very carefully worked out, but there's kind of a roughness about some of it in there somewhere. And that was something that I always really admired in underground comics, was that they were not trying to, cut all of that roughness out of it. They weren't trying to airbrush it. They weren't trying to smooth it out. So that was very important to me. In terms of the process itself and how long it takes me to do the work, the book took me 5 years to do, probably all told, including the writing. What else would I say? I mean, I have a very worked out method of doing all this, so that the entire book was very carefully scripted. I'd say about 94% scripted before I even began to pencil it. And there were 5 chapters, and as I finished each one, I would show it to my wife and get her input, and then I'd get her input on the next one that I was about to start, which was all done in breakdown form so that you could read it. And if there were any changes I was going to make there, then I would make them. So basically, drawing is a lot of hard work. You don't want to redraw panels if you don't have to. It really sucks, to spend a lot of time, especially if it was a difficult panel, and then you're like, holy shit, that's not working. That's not helping the story. I got to get rid of it. You don't want to do that. So basically, the idea is to have every one of these things worked out as carefully as possible so that you can then just follow the process from, writing to drawing to inking and all that. So the entire book was penciled before any ink was laid down, all 236 pages. There was no ink work done by that point. At that point, I lettered the entire book, which was something I'd never done before. And I don't know about other cartoonists, and in fact, I think these days most people just use some sort of typeface font that they get on the computer and they lay it on there, and it looks like maybe somebody lettered it. But being old school and maybe not even being able to figure that out, I just do all the lettering on my own. And I think most cartoonists will tell you lettering is really not a lot of fun. But, just looking at the page you put up here, I can see where the lettering helps it. It feels organic and it matches my style. And that's another thing that I grew up with. You see, like a lot of 60s culture that was prevalent at the time, whether it was rock and roll or comics. The whole idea was that it was done by one person. And that's the kind of thing that I really liked. I was never into those kinds of comics where you got a letter or you got a pencil or you got an inker and all that shit. I really don't like that. I don't like that group process. I really like the idea of something that happened organically and it was done by one person. So, yeah, lettered the whole thing. And by the time I did that, put in the balloons and then started inking the whole thing. I don't know if this kind of nuts and bolts stuff is interesting to anybody, but
it is to me.
Yeah. So, but that process, here's one thing I'll say. Comics, as I say, are really demanding, but with something like a graphic novel, and especially if you work in a style like mine, which is really detailed, you've got to find ways that process is as streamlined as possible. And that's one thing that I think I succeeded in doing, because the more of any of these individual things that you're doing in comics, the more you do them, the better you get at them. So for me, it just makes sense to do that as opposed to skipping around, like getting 10 pages done and then starting another 10, because, your drawing improves. And if your drawing improves and you've got 50 or 60 pages penciled, it may continue to improve, or at least stay as good as you continue drawing the rest of the book. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and it probably did make it go faster. This book is 236 pages, and my previous book, Chicago, was like 166, I think, and that one took a little bit longer to do. So, but that was the first one that I had done, and you really learn this stuff. You learn as you go.
Now, was there any part of the story when you were, putting it on the page that, kind of was harder than others?
You mean to draw or emotionally?
Or emotionally, yes, sorry.
Yeah, I guess, sure. I mean, one thing.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Sorry?
I was going to say, go ahead.
Okay. There's some paradoxical aspects to this. It's really, it's tough to draw yourself being sexually molested. That's not easy. On the other hand, I don't remember the actual drawing of most of this being really challenging, because I kind of feel like I go into a fugue state a little bit. And it's like I'm looking at a movie that I happen to be in, and I'm drawing it. So that's not that hard. And also, drawing yourself as a kid and having things happen to you, that's not so tough, in the sense that, like, no one's going to judge you for having been to a school like Chartwell Manor, right? Mm-hmm. You didn't ask to go, you got sent there. So by definition, you're a sympathetic figure at that point in the story. Conversely, at later points in the story, if I'm with a woman who I'm paying for sex and she's shooting up in front of me or something like that, well, that's trickier. And that, especially in this day and age, but at any day and age, that's a sort of moment of exploitation, maybe of myself, maybe of the woman. That's kind of tough to draw.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of how you may be judged for, well, having done that, and also having the temerity to then draw it. So those are things that are kind of tough. But I got to bring this back to what I just said, which is that you go into a fugue state, and I try to capture this stuff as it happened. But at the same time, I should add, being a comic book artist, I'm working with all the tropes of comics. That includes entertainment, that includes graphics, it includes drawing as well as I can. And it really includes narrative, because when you read my stuff, I don't think you'll be bored. The story will move, the story moves fast, the story takes you through what's happening. So you're actually juggling a lot of things like this when you're making a book like this happen. Which leads to the next thing, which is that, like, typically, you know, with a book like this, you're always asked, was it cathartic, right? And the short answer to that is maybe, but the main answer to it is, well, I'm juggling a lot of different things here, like the ones I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And the overriding concern for a comic book artist is putting together a good piece of entertainment. And by that, I don't just mean like funny or with a good punchline or any of that kind of stuff. But as I say, a story that moves, a story that engages you, so that, like, you might not like my character, but you will get my character. You will understand his behavior. You will understand why he might be doing all of the things that he's doing in the story. You know what I mean?
Oh, no, I definitely do.
Yeah, so those are the things that are really involved with this. I mean, you know, I guess I just say that partly as a way to make the point that with a work like this, you know, I'm not bleeding onto the page. I'm not like, not looking for therapy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, is there anything that you would hope people would take away from this, or you just wanted to get it out, the story?
Well, take away from it. Let's see. I guess the obvious thing is that for me, is that there is growth through life, through a lot of things that happen to us. I point this out in the beginning of the book that it's not a recovery memoir. It's not about time that you spend in those kinds of places, whether it be a therapist's office or an AA meeting. There's some of that stuff in there, but that's not really what it's about. That it's about the scars that happen to us, and that yet we somehow manage to live on past them. And the growth is possible, and the good things are possible. And that, you know, cliche though it sounds, life does go on, and our lives develop. Mine did. And I've heard this question before, and the other way I'd like to put it is that one aspect of how growth is possible is that this book happened. If growth wasn't possible, this book would never have happened, because I would never have found a way to artistically and creatively put that into a book, not a document, but a book about that time. So that's also something that is really worth considering. That if life doesn't break you, you know, to sort of misquote Nietzsche, to make you stronger, and it'll at least allow you to learn from your experiences, and even use your experiences as fodder for art, because that's what I've done here.
Okay. Well, unless you have anything else, I mean, you've definitely covered a lot, and I appreciate, you taking the time to talk about your book. And I read through it, and I, found it very, impactful. And I think I'm definitely going to give it another reread.
Okay, good.
So when does the book come out, and where can people, pick it up?
The book comes out May 25th. That's its release date, so it's less than a month away. They should be able to get it at any comic book store that exists, and especially that carries Fantagraphics titles. And you can also get it from Fantagraphics website, or even Amazon, as far as I know. It should be available now. Okay.
And are you on social media?
I am on social media. If you go to Instagram, Glenhead Comics, you can find my work, and you can even order it that way from me if you chose. I could get a signed copy to you.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk, and I hope you're doing well, staying safe and healthy.
As much as possible. You too.
And so, but if you ever have anything in the future, I'd love to talk to you again.
Okay, I will definitely let you know. I am sure I will. I'm working on another book now. So.
All right. Well, thank you, and have a good day.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Hey, you're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.